Thank you so much for that. And I think you naturally kind of went into like our second question. So Carrington, I'll ask you this. Do you think solidarity between migrant and Indigenous folks is relevant? Why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that's really important. And I want to draw back to like the whole talk of reconciliation that we have that's been going on for however many years now. And something that we often hear in the Indigenous community, or, you know, people identify as, let's say, a settler or whatever, or you hear the term like uninvited guest. And other Indigenous people don't agree with me on this, but however, I think, like, for example, settler is for a very specific group of people. That is for the descendants of those who settled the land, who are from European descent. I don't think that an immigrant who came to Canada today is a settler. It's not the same thing. It's very different to have came here 200 years and to have commit or be a part of genocide versus immigrating to a country today for whatever reasons. And, you know, what's beautiful about Indigenous languages is that they are very descriptive, they are very unique, and it's about relationships. And so we cannot use one word to define multiple types of relationships. That's just being lazy. We have to look at each unique relationship and to think about what that connection means. What are we looking for? My relationship that needs to be built or repaired with settlers is different from a refugee who came here a month ago. That's not the same thing, and it shouldn't be treated as if it's the same thing. Just like calling a refugee an uninvited guest is harmful, right? I don't want to reinforce the notion that you're not welcome on these lands, that you're only a guest if your intention is to be here for your entire lifetime and the future of your generations, because that's harmful. So we really need to be thinking about the types of language that we're using and the message that we're trying to give off, because I understand the intention of it isn't to be harmful, but intention and impact are very different. And so we have to really sit with those thoughts and think about what it is, what is our goal? What do we want to build with migrant and immigrant communities? And even that word of like, what does solidarity look like between migrant and Indigenous folks? I think Indigenous folks really need to challenge that. Just because you're Indigenous to Canada and, you know, the United States, Indigenous people are in the Philippines, they're across the world, and that we don't own indigeneity. And I think Natives, unfortunately, have that misconception that, you know, they don't even view Latinx people as Indigenous, because there's that misconception once again, or African people, or people from India. Like, there are Indigenous peoples to every part of the world. And so you could come to Canada and you're still Indigenous, right? And so even in the way we're using our language, being cognizant of how that's going to impact people. It's just like, you know, we have 1492. A lot of North American, like Canada, United States, Indigenous folks monopolize that, and we don't focus on how it really impacted Caribbean islands and the Taino and the Caribs. And 1492 is about them. It's about the Caribbean islands, but we have taken over the narrative of first contact as being something, you know, with Canada and the United States, and that's not the truth. And so I think Indigenous peoples really need to challenge, you know, some of those things we hold on to, and I don't think it makes anyone a bad person. But, you know, like RJ had mentioned, there is some unpacking that needs to be done if we're going to move forward in a really good way. And I just think that, like, why wouldn't we want to have solidarity? Like, there's so much different types of knowledge and teachings that is out there. We just have to, like, be able and willing to step out of our comfort zone and to say, like, we don't know everything, and it's okay to ask for a different perspective from a different religion or spirituality. And then it's just going to add to our bundle. It's not going to be like tainted because it's not from North America, you know? And I'm kind of blabbing, but yeah, that's just what I'm thinking.
No, that's like a really important point. And you're right, there are Indigenous peoples in the Philippines. And there isn't just the perpetuation of having like a tiered system of indigeneity is kind of just like an internalization of how we're categorized a lot and othered a lot. So yeah, thank you for that. Lukayo, are you with us? Yeah, you are. Hi.
Hello. All right. Yeah, I do believe that solidarity between migrant and Indigenous folks are very relevant. And I guess to build on what Carrington said, and also about Indigenous folks in the Philippines, and then also what you said, Andy, about like the tiers of indigeneity, and about like there is a very hard disconnect, I think, among the Filipino community around identifying as Indigenous, because of a lot of internalized colonialism. But there's also folks that identify as Indigenous without understanding what that is. So it's a very complicated, nuanced thing. And there are a lot of migrants that do come from what some scholars like Grace Nono would call minority Indigenous communities. And so to kind of unpack and explain that, Grace Nono, in her book Song of the Babaylan, differentiates between majority Indigenous and minority Indigenous based on the UNCHRPS, the United Nations. It's the thing the United Nations wrote for Indigenous folks. It's so long acronym. And so the majority Indigenous people, of which I would be a part of, so I'm Indigenous to the Bicol people, or the Bicol region, or the Bicol ethnicity, or whatever, colonization benefited us. I mean, it destroyed us, but then also in the way that the government was set up, the Philippine government, it created a lot of colonial laws that then, for those who bought into it, like the Bicol, like the Tagalog, like the Ilocano, we got a lot of benefits if we catered to the colonial government. And then there are minority Indigenous, smaller tribes that continue to resist. And they continue to resist to this day. And so one of the elders or teachers that I have, she loves to talk about how me as a Bicol, or that the Tagalogs are constantly trying to decolonize, while she's just still trying to fight colonization heads on. There's no decolonization process for her. It's a constant trying to make sure they don't take her land, they don't take the children among the tribe. And so there's a different disconnect. And there are very few migrants that come from those smaller tribes, just because of how they're deeply impoverished by a colonial system that's being fed by the Filipino migrant system. So it's like there's a multiple moving pieces. And I think it's extremely important for migrants, if they have that, like the children of migrants as well, who romanticize indigeneity, who grow up here, second generation. I grew up here, though I was born in the Philippines, so it's also a strange, contested place that I live in, around wanting to return to my homeland, but then having characteristics that are extremely Torontonian. And so there's a lot of romanticization of indigeneity, or wanting to return because of wanting to be in solidarity with Indigenous folks here, but then not understanding what that indigeneity means when you go to the homeland and being treated like a balakbayan, or like a superstar because of the Western accent that you have, or your Western education, and not knowing that the Canadian mining companies in the Philippines are the biggest destructions of the other tribes that are still fighting ongoing colonization, because of how the Filipino government has these contracts with Canada to continually displace and destroy the land there. And so all of these nuances would never be understood without a relationship of solidarity, because there's so many moving pieces. And even the things that my teacher and elder from the Manobo tribe told me, that's not in public knowledge. That's because we supported her refugee claim. We fought for her to stay here so that she wouldn't be murdered by government troops and paramilitary who are vested interest in taking her mountain and her people away from their land. And so she's able to continue organizing from here because of that solidarity movement between diasporic Filipinos and this Indigenous elder. And in turn, so much history that is not being taught to people in the homeland in the north, or in the diaspora about the south, which is constantly bombarded with Islamophobia as being seen as the dangerous Muslim South, when, you know, 30 of the tribes of the 43, people don't even know how many tribes there are in the South, but 30 of them are non-Islamicized, and they're still indigenous in the way that they have an unbroken lineage that has not been interrupted by the colonization of Arab or Spanish communities. Colonizers, sorry. They also had communities of colonizers. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm hoping I'm trying to grab the threads of why it's so important, because a lot of Filipino communities don't understand the importance of understanding indigeneity in the homeland, and then indigeneity here, and why we have to be in solidarity, why we have to build these relationships, because there's so much pain going around, and without these relationships, then people use scapegoats, and that's how I find creates the xenophobia and then supports settler colonialism and supports racism. But when you aren't building these relationships and understanding your own history and your own position with the other nations that are happening, the other nations and tribes in the Philippines, and then the nations here, then it's just easy to continuously buy into, like RJ said, you know, the white supremacist narrative of dividing us, instead of realizing that we're actually deeply united by these processes. And so, and that we can be friends, that we can that we can rise up together. But it's not even just about fighting, it's that we can love together, that we can celebrate together, that we can make jokes and reclaim Shrek as a part of a BIPOC symbol. Shout out to RJ's and Carrington's obsession with Shrek. When I'm talking about Shrek, that means I'm done, that I have enough to say. So hopefully that made sense. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lukayo. I think it's really important to, especially for the diaspora, to kind of really reflect on how they can appropriate, how like they have this hyphenated identity where they can appropriate and still perpetuate colonial things and still be oppressed by colonial things at the same time. It's like it's a mindfuck for sure. Sorry.